Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Graham. Senator Rennick.
How are you going?
Good, thank you.
I've just got one quick question. Is it possible for Australia Post to disclose how much the banks pay Australia Post and its licensees to carry out banking services in the regions?
It's not possible, Senator, due to commercial confidence with those agreements and clauses in those agreements that protects that confidentiality.
Okay. Do you know if it has it decreased recently, or has it gone up, or?
No, it stayed fairly constant. I think it's worth noting, Senator, that the original agreement contained two parts to that agreement. One part was an initial contribution to set up the necessary infrastructure and technology and training for our post offices.
Sure.
The second part related to the fees for service that continue today, and they are calibrated based on time, effort, and a range of other matters, and we then agree a commercial rate.
Sure. So it's an activity-based costing model. Okay.
Correct.
Good. And so with all these branch closures in the regions now, is there a model that allows the post office in that town to pick up these banking services?
Yes, there is. We are seeing an increase, obviously, in bank at post. As banks leave towns, we see a rise in bank at post activities within that post office, particularly if it is the only one left. We have some 1,600, I think, 1,100?
1,150.
1,150 towns in Australia, regional Australia particularly, where we are the only banking service. So we do see that spike in transactions. What we then see is that happening over a 1 to 2 year period, and then it normalises as people transition to digital services, which is obviously the banks are encouraging them to do.
Okay, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
My questions follow on very neatly from Senator
Good
Rennick,
thing I was
if you
going
want.
to you next then, Senator Davey.
That. Because I also want to talk about the bank at post. And just one of the questions, so the payments to Australia Post have stayed relatively stable. What about the payments to the licensed post office operators? Have they remained consistent for the duration of, or since the last negotiations?
They have, Senator. Indeed, they've gone up in line with the increased activity. Tony, I think you may have some numbers there.
My name is Tani Mangos, Executive General Manager of Community Sustainability and Stakeholder Engagement. Senator, proportionally, the amount paid to our licensees has actually is higher in this new arrangement, but we can take that question on notice.
I'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
You mentioned 1,150 outlets provide bank post services throughout the country. How many financial institutions does Bank at Post currently service? So, because people can remain the customer of their own bank, but Bank at Post, how many institutions do you provide?
I might just correct. It's 1,150 that are post offices where there's no other banking institution in town.
So there's more. So 1,150 outlets where the post office is the only bank in town. Right. And how many post offices provide services across the board?
3,500, Senator, provide bank at post services to a range of customers, and currently we service 81 banks and financial institutions with bank at post services.
81 financial institutions. So that is far more than just the big four.
Absolutely, yes.
So do they include financial institutions such as consumer-owned banking sector? Are they covered?
Correct. Full range of rural, regional, community-owned banks. This is for what we call consumer banking, so deposit withdrawal to a prescribed service standard.
So that was my next question. You must be telepathic. You provide deposit and withdrawal services. Any other services? I know I can pay most of my bills at Post?
You can pay your bills. There's two areas. One, to do that through your banking arrangements. We also have Bill Pay, which is an Australia Post service itself. It allows you to pay numerous bills through that particular service. We're also providing some basic small business banking services, but we are currently in dialogue with the bank around the range of services we provide and how that needs to change with changing community needs. Also, the increased usage of Bank at Post by small business, which may have not been fully contemplated when the original arrangement was put in place.
So I was part of the Regional Banking Task Force that was conducted before the election, but the report was released post the election, and I do thank the government for releasing that report. There were recommendations made in that report, which there's still concerns that many of the banks are closing their regional branches as we go, in spite of that report. And there's another Senate inquiry that is about to commence, and I would encourage Bank at Post to participate fully in that inquiry as well. But some of the recommendations were quite specific about Bank at Post, and particularly a recommendation to collaborate more widely to help customers understand banking services available to them and to utilise those services. And that came about because there was a perceived lack of understanding in some community towns of exactly the level of service Bank at Post could provide. Can you give me an update as to what Bank at Post has done to respond to those recommendations? Yeah,
thank you, Senator. As you say, as we see, banks close branches, we've done a number of things. One, on our own website and social media. We've got dedicated communication channels that would focus on that particular town or that area. We obviously have point of sale material that is available in the post office to explain to people what services are available at Bank at Post. We're also working proactively with the banks to continue to refine the protocols we have when a bank closure is announced. It's fair to say that the closure itself is a sensitive issue in terms of announcements, etc., and we're encouraging the banks to, give us, as much time as possible to educate the local community, and whether that's through, say, point of sale, through social media, through other activities, even to the point of having a community town hall where we'll happily go and explain the range of services that we have. And I think, we are in continued dialogue with the bank to also use their channels to explain what is available and what is not available. We're also working with the bank to try and standardise the range of offerings, because one of the difficulties with our team members is if you're a NAB customer or a CommBank customer or a Westpac customer and you're all on the line together, there are three quite varying arrangements that can be transacted depending on which bank you represent.
And are the banks being helpful? Are they supporting you? Are they providing a bit of assistance, including through extra resourcing to ensure that the messages are going out?
Yeah, I've met with the three major bank CEOs in recent months, and we've certainly, emphasised to them the criticality of early communication, of having the right protocol, not just in terms of the services provided, but also to ensure that our post office outlet is actually physically capable of handling, the increase in customer traffic or other things that may be required in terms of disability access, or things that were maybe built into the bank branch itself, but need to be addressed within our post office branch.
And what conversations have you had, if any, with the government about promoting the Bank at Post services, increasing the level of awareness of the services, and ensuring that communities, and particularly communities where banks are closing and leaving them with no traditional branch, are aware of the services that Bank at Post provide? Is government providing any support to Bank at Post?
I think we have had no specific dialogue with government on Bank at Post. I think the dialogue we have had is, to emphasise our capability and our ability to step in and to provide these services. And as Tani mentioned, over 1,150 towns where we are the only bank in town, and we take that responsibility very seriously. We are continuing to invest in promoting the Bank at Post services. It is a generic communication because each bank is slightly different, so therefore creating awareness that those services are available is a big part of it, both community-based as well as generally through our normal media channels.
And just finally, one of the key concerns that was raised time and time again in the Regional Banking Task Force was the need for continued access to cash. And so one of the concerns about Bank at Post was limitations on withdrawal amounts, on making sure you could get floats for your weekend footy games or your CWA fundraising events. What steps have been taken, and there were recommendations about that in the report, but what steps have you taken at Bank at Post to ensure that the cash needs of communities can still be met and that they're as flexible and easy as possible to access?
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Look, I think that remains a cause for concern. Every community is different, and in our original Bank at Post discussions and agreement, we weren't set up as well for what we now see as what's occurring. And as I mentioned before, small business particularly, I think, was not fully understood in terms of the needs. I was in a branch, one of our post offices down the South Coast recently, and again, the local hairdresser was depositing money, the panel beater was depositing money. We need to make sure that we are physically set up for the receipt of that cash. Also, how do we use that same cash and recycle it so it actually comes in the door and goes back out the door, because we don't want to be holding large amounts of cash from a security perspective. We also need to look at the delivery of cash, particularly to regional and remote Australia, because it is not as frequent as may be required by the community and has become somewhat expensive. So there are a whole bunch of I think, areas that need to be further explored, but we are seeing an increased need from small business particularly for the availability of cash, and I think there is work to be done with the banks and with those communities to understand what those cash needs are, because they do differ town by town. In this particular South Coast town, if we had not had that service available, then it was a 35-kilometre drive for those small businesses to deposit cash, which obviously is an unrealistic expectation, particularly when they were used to going to a branch in the same street.
Couldn't agree more. And the issue of cash transport is a big one. I note that the UK has had similar issues and similar inquiries as what we've had here in Australia, and they were looking at having some sort of a cash hub so that businesses in a town could pool and get one sort of armoured guard. Am I allowed to use brand names? But one armoured car to bring the cash in. But that's not something that Bank at Post provides a service for at this stage, sort of like a cash hub for businesses if they were to. Would you be open to that if a community was to come to Bank at Post and say every business in town's willing to, co-fund the transport of cash, can you be the collection point?
Yeah, look, we've had discussions. There's two providers of cash delivery in Australia. We've had discussions with both of them. We are in some towns sort of providing that, but not as specific as a defined model. It's just happened that's what sort of happened, and we've become the depositor of choice and the provider of cash. But I think it is a major issue that we need to stare into, and certainly we find in certain towns with certain demographics where cash is still actually used more so than what other areas may have for different reasons particularly. But we are working proactively with the banks to look at what the future of cash is and how we support it, and I'll be happy to continue to update the Senate on that.
Okay, I think that's all from me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Madam Chair.